Okay. Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for being here today evening. Uh, Currently, we're going to be having a panel discussion about RAGs in production, how to deliver impact safely and efficiently. The moderator for this session is Christopher Parisien, who is the Senior Manager of Applied Research at NVIDIA, who's leading the development of NEMO Guardrails, a toolkit for safety and security in large language models. Chris holds a PhD in computational linguistics from the University of Toronto, where he used AI models to explain the strange ways that children learn language. During his time in industry, he helped build the first generation of mainstream chatbots, developed systems to understand medical records, and served as Chief Technology Officer at NextJ Health, a patient-centered health platform. His current focus at NVIDIA is to bring trustworthy language models to large enterprises. I invite Chris to introduce the panelists.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good, the microphone works. All right. Thank you all for joining us. I think we've got a good conversation lined up. Okay, so I have some excellent people here with me. We hope to have a great conversation here. So directly to my left, we have Wendy Foster, who's an instructor at the Data Science Institute at the University of Toronto and an advisor at Hetz Ventures. Next in line, Everaldo Aguiar, who's a senior engineering manager at PagerDuty. And then all the way down at the end, we have Margaret Wu, a senior data scientist at CIBC. All of these people have great experiences with RAGs. It's not like this is a thing that has only started being created like 3.5 weeks ago. It's been around for at least 4.5 weeks, so we've got extensive experience now. I think most of the people in the room have a pretty good sense of what these things are for. So, if you've only been introduced to it a week and a half ago, so RAGs are retrieval augmented generation. This is the system where, we often call it like a chat with your data kind of setup. So rather than just having the same ChatGPT that everybody uses, you've got a whole bunch of your typically proprietary data, or at least company data, and you want to be able to ask it questions and get reasonable, fluent answers back. So typically the way these work, you'll set up a knowledge base with a whole bunch of documents. User query comes in, you send the query to the knowledge base, it gets some little chunks of text back, and you feed those chunks of text to a big language model, and it formulates an answer. So it's a nice, elegant setup. It solves some problems. It introduces a few other ones if you're not paying attention. So getting these things into production is not trivial. We run into a lot of issues with accuracy sometimes, with security, governance, and sometimes it can cost a lot of money to get these things set up, and we want to make sure that we get decent value out of it. So we're going to hope to dive into a bunch of these issues. So to get us started, I'd like our panel to please give us a little more information about yourselves, a little bit of background. As you do so, tell us a little bit about what your experience has been like setting up RAGs. Where have you tried to use them? Where's the, where's the value been? Maybe we'll start at the far end. Margaret, if you want to get us started.
Okay, so it works. So my name is Margaret Wu. I am a senior data scientist at CIBC. So I have been working with CIBC for 4 years, and my main responsibility on my role is building the machine learning or AI-driven solutions for pretty much all the line of business across the bank. So recently, actually since last year, we got highly involved into the generative AI topics, and RAG is one of the first thing we try. So talking about my own experience in terms of RAG, so for our bank, where current RAG applications are mainly internal employee facing. So basically means that our RAG system is connecting with internal knowledge base, which allows our employees to go in and then search information from there. So examples like some Q&A chatbots, so our employee can go in and search any knowledges related with our internal documents.
I'm Everaldo. I'm a senior manager at a company called PagerDuty. If you don't know what we do, maybe your evenings are more quiet, but we are an incident management product. So essentially, if you're an engineer and you have a bunch of services and they're instrumented. When they go down, we have a process for ingesting all that log information and alerting you when something is wrong, so that your person who is on call can go and take a look at it. And so I manage a couple of teams there, a data science team and a machine learning engineering team that work together to implement a lot of our AI products. So a lot of what we do has to do with making it easier for those engineers who are on call to resolve those incidents. And so things have to run really fast. If we have a model that has to... You can't hear me? Thank you for letting me know. Those, all of you up here were just pretending that you're hearing me. But anyway, so we have a lot of different AI products at PagerDuty. All of them have to run really fast because it's really essential that we alert people when something is wrong. And so as of last year, we started to work on a lot of different Gen AI features. And more recently, we've also started to look into a variety of different RAG applications. We'll talk a little bit more about those, but we started looking at internal applications first to help engineers who are onboarding and had questions about the company, the product, acronyms, and so on. And we're now starting to develop and ship features that external users can interact with as well. Wendy, apparently you have to put your mic really close.
All right. Oh, good. Okay, I have it held at the right angle. You have to hold it really close.
Fine.
All right. So Wendy, I work currently with idea stage and seed stage startups, really helping them refine their approach to AI-based product development, helping them shape out the short as well as the longer term vision for this kind of investment. So why I care about technical decisions around RAG is because you see many very early stage like startups actually formulating like their initial like value props around this prime technology investment. Value projection is incredibly important to me, and I know there's some incredible product applications that Margaret and Everaldo are going to be talking about, and I'm hoping to provide a bit of like an investment like lens on top of it. What I look for in terms of value, I center the user in those conversations, not just the revenue, but.
I thought you were providing the investment. But sounds good.
Well, you want to return to the world.
Well, Wendy, maybe you can actually go into that a little bit more. So when you are working with these startups in these early stages, you know, people come up with very exciting ideas.
Sometimes.
What can you do to help shape those ideas to really drill into that value? What do you get them thinking about, particularly at the early stages?
Yeah, so I don't think it's ever too early to start actually having like your value plan be like a 4-year projection, right? And I don't mean that necessarily in terms of your monetization strategy. I mean, you can start out with like an idea that has like a short-term like option for market like fit, but has like no traction like longer term. So one of the examples I used was early on at a like small, again, idea stage like startup approached me for investment, and essentially they had just wrapped an OpenAI API and were doing some natural language prompts conversion into SQL queries, right? And like this was their entire like product foundation. And for me, it's like what problem are you trying to solve? It seems like very, very simple, but often in the excitement around how you can leverage like this kind of technology so easily, like it's not even clear what problem you're trying to solve, right? So my work with early stage startups is to get them to define the problem space. When I talk about having like a 4-year kind of like vision set for value, it's that if your application is toy, it only has short-term like value. We're looking for something that can grow and like iterate and fit into a market within 4 years' time. So grows into your market. It isn't like a GameStop snog, you know. If that answers your question a little bit.
Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about some design decisions then. Everaldo and Margaret, you both had looked at both internal as well as external facing applications. You'll get into a lot of different options for how you can be setting this up. Obviously, performance, accuracy, latency, these things really matter. How did you make the kinds of decisions that you had made when you were setting these things up? Everaldo, do you want to go first?
No.
No. At least he's honest, folks.
Reject, go back. No, just kidding. So I think So for as many of the other business or companies here, at CIBC, we actually start really simple when we start the journey. We use those pretty well-defined and popular framework to start our exploration of RAG applications. So example, like many people use LangChain, Llama Index. Also, Azure have Azure Search AI, so you can pretty much put your documents in and get use the service to get a result. So that's our beginning our journey, and we use those services to build the benchmark model for us. And those benchmark model, it works. It's just not to the standard that we require, especially considering how fast the technology are evolving nowadays. There's so many things like advanced RAG techniques is coming up every period of time. So next phases after we did our explorations into using those framework, we actually started building our own RAG modules. So it's more customized and also it's more feasible for us to integrating with those different advanced techniques. So that's our story.
It's been fairly similar for us. We wanted to make sure we had some traction, and we have a process for getting input from internal users first. So if you're familiar with, there's a Python package called Streamlit that allows you to really quickly create a web UI to many things, including chatbot applications. So the first thing we did was to roll out a process where different internal teams could work with our data science team to roll out their own RAG internally using context that was specific to their team. And that was also a nice, tricky way to get people invested and interested in validating the technology. So we went that route initially. We have a bunch of different internal applications that use specific knowledge bases from different teams. And then slowly started to port that into more production level, robust APIs that we're now kind of rolling into the actual PagerDuty product, but using the knowledge that we got from all of those internal prototypes over time. Yeah, basically that.
Margaret, do you want to actually go into some of the things that you found potentially surprising as you were getting through this that you found really did help the performance issues that you might have been running into? Particularly in your case, it was interesting. I didn't realize this when we were talking before, that you really rebuilt much of those core components yourself. So you ended up having a lot more control over what you were doing. So what did you find you were able to do there?
So by talking about that, it's actually our team did a lot of experiments across different technologies. And then also, like as many of your folks knows, that banks accuracy is definitely our number one. We don't want the bot generating anything wrong. So there's a lot of techniques that we try and is end up being used in the production level. So like for example, the chunking optimizations. Some of our team members actually explore tons of different chunking techniques and ended up finding there's one that's really good for our own knowledge base. So we use that for production level. Other thing like, for example, something we tried recently is called content regeneration. So it's pretty good to deal with tables or footnote. Think about like in some banking documents, we have like tables in the PDF file, HTML files. And then what we did, we convert those files into Markdown, and which keep the structure of the table. And after that, we use some small open source models to actually rephrase the content in that table, so that we actually, instead of putting the table in as a chunk into the retrieval systems, we actually use the summarized word from the models. It actually works pretty well.
Thank you. So one of the things that we were talking about when we were, we all hung out for like an hour before this. This is how one prepares a panel. You meet up an hour before the panel and figure out what you're going to say. One of the things that we were really talking about is with a lot of these early projects that we get into, it's great to be able to find value early on and be able to create that. But there's a big part of what we're doing that is really just figuring out how this technology works, figuring out what we can do with it. Wendy, when you hear these kinds of stories of people that have gone through this and they've learned some pieces, and we're really trying out some of these techniques, what can you advise them for getting to that next step to find that value?
I think it's like, I know it may seem like a bit like maybe overpressured to always be centering like your end user value, even with like internal like sandbox experiments. The reason I feel so passionately about doing that, because I feel that it has a direct like impact on the quality of the productionized like end goal, right? So even if you're working on like internal like applications that are allowing like your teams to be able to like learn a new technology or up level your AI maturity within an organization, to me I still think there should be a value attached to that, because like the cost of those experiments are so high for the organization, for like the team focus, right? So what is the outcome? If it's a learning outcome, explicitly state it and measure it, right? And it builds like those muscles around constantly like measuring against like a goal, right? Because like play is loose. Like I think of it in terms of just like generalized play theory, right? Like play is fine, but play does have a goal, right? So
yeah, I can add a bit on that. I think we also talk about there's two aspects actually we discuss. One is definitely because as a bank we're more like as IT teams in the bank we're more like internal support team. So building this type of chatbot is actually helping our employees to improve their work efficiency. Because think about like for banks, there's so many products, services that we have, and there's tons of documents and procedures are related with those products and services. And it's really hard to have like one people or two people to know everything. So having those bots definitely helps their employees to search knowledges across different domains really easily. And other than that, we also talk about it as like a learning journey. Because for everyone, like Gen AI is a really new topics, and for our banks, same thing as well. So it's really having involved into those products, knowledges and development of those products. It's actually a really good learning journey for us. It's helping us to be more innovative and AI matured.
I think like the only thing I'd add is like all those are measurable though too, right? Because my fear is that these kinds of like investments turn into like massive and deep cost centers, and then it becomes harder and harder to justify like the investment, because the value, which I'll probably repeat to the next 13 minutes, is actually not materialized for either for your teams, for yourself, or for the organization, right?
So we're often working in these fairly regulated spaces. Financial services, definitely, that's going to be highly regulated. Incident management may not be terribly highly regulated, but certainly if you're waking somebody up at 3 a.m. and you're getting something wrong, they're going to be far less tolerant of that kind of error. I will assure you that, having been woken up at 3 a.m. by PagerDuty before. How have you managed the kinds of, potential error issues, but also legal issues, security issues that you want to deal with in these kinds of applications? It's a very new application space. Where does that risk profile differ from the kinds of machine learning applications that we might be used to? How have you managed that? Everaldo?
Pretty easy question, right? But yeah.
I hope you're kidding on that one.
I'm not. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that we categorized risk internally when we're looking at this new Gen AI applications. Like first of all, given that we are a incident management product, we have to be able to alert you instantly if something goes wrong. So even the process of adding this new technology into our product, we have to consider the latency that it adds to maybe how much time it would take for us to ping you at 3 a.m. We want you to wake up at 3 a.m., not 3:05. But from a legal standpoint, there's also a lot of negative ramifications of things like hallucinations. The very first version of our Gen AI feature that was rolled out last year had a habit of adding random hashtags at the end of summaries, for example. Sounds really silly. Like we would have incident summaries that would end with hashtag engineering for life. Don't know why. But customers don't like that, because if their incident summaries have funny things that shouldn't be there, they will lose trust on other parts of the product. Right? So we after that, started to take a much more conservative approach to how we roll out these incremental portions of Gen AI featuring and RAG implementations. So a lot of what we do is sanitizing input that's coming from users and making sure that nothing that's coming from the user goes directly to a large language model and then back to the product. And that's been really helpful. And in that sanitization process, we work very closely with the legal team to make sure that we block things that they know for a fact should never be part of a response from a model, or shouldn't show up in the product, which includes some of those hashtags. We work with the product teams to get context about things that us as a data science team are not aware of, but that shouldn't be in those responses. So there's a lot of, at least at this point, manual work on cataloging these different things that shouldn't be part of the model response and finding ways of ensuring that they're not there, and doing it fast.
Thanks. Margaret, did you want to add something from the financial side?
Yeah, I think for our applications, we also do a lot of checkings before we actually productionize it. Like for example, the Q&A chatbot I was talking about it. Basically, we did tons of testing cases before we launch it to production. We also have dedicated teams and members, especially the knowledge expert, we call it. So they are actually reviewing the answers generated by the bot, and then they are providing the feedback on that. So for all those false questions, for example, there's a case that we noticed. There are like really important pages or steps that actually didn't really capture well in the large language model generations. So for those cases, we need to think about strategies before we productionalize it, how to mitigate those things happen. So we ended up having like people labeling all those important documents, and whenever the question related with those documents, the entire document got retrieved and showed it to the user, so that we don't let the large language models do the summarizations or rephrases.
Thanks, that's really helpful. We've got a bit of time left. Before we get to questions from the audience, so start thinking about your questions. Can everyone offer a little bit of parting advice for the audience? How do we get value? How do we get to production? Wendy, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think you actually captured it. I mean, like the first question that I always have for companies I'm talking to is, how do you get to value with this investment, right? As I said, like for me, it's incredibly important that there's like a user value attached to the products that we're creating that leverage this particular kind of technology. So I know we spend a lot of time talking about like the technology metrics, like is our models accurate? Are we reducing the amount of like error in the output? But to what end? Right? And so think about how users are going to be using your products. How do you intend to measure them? How do you intend to guardrail those? And like, that's what I want to see more of, the user value being talked about and articulated in terms of the value propositions for generative AI apps.
I think I'm going to say the same thing, but with less interesting words. But I think with Gen AI in general, and RAG applications also, you can definitely overdo, because there's so many really crazy things that you can do with these new models, right? And just to give you a random example, PagerDuty has a really important feature that allows engineers to write postmortems. So postmortems is basically a report that details everything that happened during the lifetime of an incident. So whatever triggered the incident, what was the problem, how you fixed it, how you're going to prevent it from happening again. And it's a really important document for teams to reference later, and it helps them become more mature teams over time, because they're taking the time to reason around that incident and how they solved it. And we realized that we can use large language models to do that work. And then we did it, and it works really well. And it drafts postmortems pretty eloquently. But then we started to think about it philosophically, like, should we do that? Like, would it be better to let the engineers go through the process of drafting that document? And the learning process in that case was actually potentially more important than the actual writing of the document. So we've been putting a lot of thought into what features are actually worthy of being implemented using RAGs or using LLMs. I lost track of what I was saying, but yes, Margaret.
No, I think you guys cover a really interesting point. One of the boring component I can think about it is based on our learnings. Actually, knowledge base is really important. Basically, your fundamental documents. So make sure that those documents are good quality before sending them into any of the models.
Thanks very much. All right, let's get some questions. We've got 5.5 minutes left. You can, borrow mine because they're going to answer the questions.
What a nice trick.
Take that.
This is a question for Everaldo, right? So you were mentioning that for you to safeguard the trustworthiness of the answers from the RAG system, your team had to filter out what questions that users can ask. But how can you make sure you actually cover all the questions they can't ask? I know a lot of team, what they instead of doing is that they filter what type of question user can ask. Like how did you guys kind of filter it out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know that we actually did the exact same thing. We did it a little bit backwards compared to what you just said. Instead of filtering what users cannot ask, we try to limit the topics that we can answer questions about. And I don't know that we did this the best possible way, but we have ways to add thresholds to the retrieved documents. And if the retrieved documents fall below a certain threshold, we deem the confidence of that response to not be high enough, and we simply don't show those answers. And we have a long list of things that should never be part of any response. And this comes from our legal team, or it comes from our security team. And so no matter what you ask, even if you try really hard to get our RAG to send you back something that's sensitive, hopefully it's not going to work, but please don't try. It's like...
Okay, thank you.
Hi, this question is for Margaret. You talked about LangChain and Llama Index taking you to a certain point and then moving away from them intentionally. Can you talk a little bit more about that transition and why you made those decisions and what the bank sort of did with those applications in the end?
Right, of course we can share. So this is happening at the prototyping stage. So basically what we notice, Llama Index, LangChain, they're a really good framework, they're a really good tool. They also integrated a lot of technologies as well. It's just the thing that when we deal with our own examples, especially if we want to manipulate it, certain models, we found it's easier just to have our own built-in modules, so that when we switch, like for example, if version 1 we want to use a technology, version 2 we will actually want to switch to another technology. It's just easier for us to switch the models instead of just going to the entire pipeline and then changes. And also another thing, like just based on my personal experience with those, I noticed for like LangChain or Llama Index, whenever they upgrade their versions of packages, some of the syntax you have to update it as well. So basically, for us, it means that we have to go from the basic scripts and then update all those scripts syntax. So that's the reason why we switch.
Hi, I guess the question is for Margaret. So I think you mentioned when you do the chunking experiment, you're actually breaking the table and summarize the table as a document. But I think in bank, most of the useful data are in the relational database. So how do you leverage those information in the SQL database?
Right. So first of all, we don't use SQL database to save our internal knowledge documents. So currently, our bot is built on the knowledge documents. Basically, they're HTMLs or PDFs, and that's why we use the techniques. So far, our application do not engage any relational database.
Awesome. Hey folks, thank you. Great panel discussion. My question kind of goes beyond the technical aspects of bringing a system into production. More like I wanted to ask about beyond production. Let's say your early adopters in your enterprise have adopted it. That's fine, but sometimes in the consulting framework, there's significant pushback from the consultants who don't really want to utilize it because maybe it's a 40x speed up in their workflow and they're getting paid by the hour. Or other times there's a whole bunch of education involved in how they can utilize this tool more effectively. Have you ever faced these kind of problems in your organization, or what would be your, I guess, best practices to like mitigate this problem?
I can go first. Yeah, that's a good question, right? And to Wendy's point, like before you even start to work on these features, you have to be able to identify some metrics by which you're going to measure the impact of what you're rolling out. For us specifically, we work a lot with like reducing downtime. So if a team has services that are down for a certain amount of time, part of that time is due to the engineer having to figure out what problem am I solving, what incidents in the past are similar to the one I'm dealing with now. So a lot of the Gen AI features and the RAG products that we built target some of those metrics, and we can measure, and we have processes for doing A/B testing like between accounts that have those features turned on and the ones that don't, and whether or not they are experiencing lower downtimes or fewer urgent incidents and things of that sort. But I think it's really contextual. You really have to think about how you're going to measure the impact of these features.
I just want to add really quickly too that there's like a component of your question that has to deal with like organizational or cultural change attached to like technology adoption, right? So this is why like I have like this overwhelming like focus on value in my conversations, because if you're introducing a technology that fundamentally changes, let's say in our most like basic like approaches, somebody's workflow, and it changes their behavior and it causes them to put attention in different places or not in like expected places, you have to be also willing to navigate and direct the cultural transformation that's needed to make that new workflow like appropriate and high value, right? However we want to measure that. And I think like I just see like a lack of conversation around how we enact cultural or organizational change as we implement new ways of working that are supported by AI, not just generative AI technology in general. Like we just don't do the work for it. I'm sure all of you, many of you over COVID went remote. How many thought their organizations did a very effective like job at making your ability to do your job from home as easy as it had been in office, right? You probably had gaps. So we just have gap filling to do.
I just have one more question. This is to Everaldo, actually. You mentioned sanitation methods and legal methods. So I understand the legal aspect of it. Can you talk a little more about the technical sanitation processes that you do to make sure that you don't have not just hallucination, but also wrong answers or incorrect or incomplete answers, which the RAG, like the LLMs are notorious for providing?
A little bit, and then we'll have the data scientist that actually worked on this will be here Monday, then you can poke her. But I think we have a pretty well curated set of documents that we use for all of our knowledge bases. And we've done a lot of tests to identify different ways of asking questions that result in good responses from that knowledge base. So one of the things we do during sanitation, other than removing topics from questions that we don't want to touch on, is to try and map different phrasings of those questions to specific questions that we know will result in better answers. I'm kind of giving you a very high level overview of what happens there, but we do try and map the questions that are being asked to different embeddings that we've tested in the past. But it still doesn't mean that every answer is going to be complete and fully perfect in any way. So we also have a process for users to provide some input and feedback. And we haven't yet built a feedback loop that then goes and maybe fine-tunes the model based on that, but there is already a mechanism for users to provide input one way or the other, if the answers are good, if the answers are bad. And we plan on kind of using that also to improve the generation process of the RAGs.
Thank you.
Maybe another question very related to this is that when you are serving the document for RAG usage, did you find that you need to also reorganize the document a lot to make it more hierarchical, to make it easier to trace? Is that a pipeline that your team built in? And if yes, how? Yeah, to both of you.
Oh, yes. So I think for us, we start with small knowledge base. That's easier for us to organize this, and also like we have basically humans are reading through the generation results as well. So in that cases, if we notice there's anything missing in the knowledge base, we can fit that information in, and then later on we open up the scopes of it. So that's our approach.
Yeah, most of our documents are also sort of hierarchical in nature. And the scoring during the retrieval process takes that into account, just because based on feedback, we have noticed that people prefer higher level answers at first. So that gets taken into account when we rank the retrieved documents. And usually the ones that have a higher score tend to be higher in the hierarchy of how these knowledge bases are organized. And they tend to be favored, kind of in a somewhat brute forced way, but it seems so far it has worked pretty well. It's a big 30.
Oh, we have an extra 5 minutes still?
What?
I was going by this timer up here that it counted down to 0, and then sat at 0 for a while, and it went to 60, and then it's like this. For those who can't see, it's imposingly large, the timer that's up here. So if we do have an extra couple of minutes, we can take some more. The questions are always really good. Right there. You know what? I'm going to chase you down because I'm holding the mic. Yeah, but this way we got you on record.
So thanks for the interesting panel. So I'm just curious, you've talked, like obviously RAG systems, we've talked about, there's a lot of technology, it's expanding, like the diagrams you see now with all the different components. You've talked about a bit about things that you found useful. I'm wondering if you can say maybe what are some of these new technologies that you tried and find were not useful?
It always works, right? It's always useful.
I'm actually curious to play off that question. Like in your exploration, like Margaret, with some of the tools where you're like being able to switch out version to version, were you able to actually have that kind of like estimation? Like you realize using, when you're experimenting with a different tool, the tool you'd used like previously maybe like had unacceptable performance or?
So I think I can only share our own experience. It might not applicable for all the use cases. So basically for us, because I was mentioning that we're switching the modules to play around different large language models, small models, large models, open source, closed products. We also test different advanced RAG techniques. So I would say some of techniques that it was like broadly, it was really good. Like people were talking about, they see a really good success, but it's just not really suitable for our knowledge base specifically. So there's also other techniques that not a lot of people were talking about it. Like for example, the counter regenerations. It's actually not a lot of people were talking about exactly how it works, but it actually works really well in our documents, especially for the simple documents that has really simple tables, and then the language model is able to rephrase that contents in the table pretty well. So that's kind of learning we have. Also, I feel like it's still a really case by case, like for talking about large language models. In our cases, some cases not always the large model is a better model, especially the cases that if the question is not really complicated, it's actually small open source models already able to handle the tests. We don't need to send to large model.
And I think your question is really interesting. I was thinking here, I don't know that we found something that was not that useful, but we definitely came across things that I felt were overkill. Like for a lot of our rags, we didn't necessarily have to go use a big fancy vector database, for example. A lot of what we actually have in production today just stores the knowledge base in memory. There's a package, I can't remember the name, FIS or something, that can query data from memory. And that's worked really well, actually reduced the latency in some cases. And but initially we went out and started rolling out big fancy vector databases and realized like maybe we don't need all of this for a small knowledge base that's like 50 megabytes or something.
Oh, you can use a Noe for that. That fits. That's really tiny and fast. Yeah, that's a good one.
Cut his microphone. He's selling things now. Yeah.
I was wondering too, to play up from that, like what your experiences were with like experimenting with LangChain, because the teams and companies I worked with who like found it on like that abandoned it after like 4 months because it just like wasn't performant or like didn't scale well. So I'm wondering if you ran into those challenges as well, because I'll say like LangChain had like a big moment and then a big rollback, like in my experience.
Same like I shared earlier. I mean, to me, it is really easy to hands on. So when I first coded, I use it because you just take some demos and then use all those code to run it. But just later on, I feel like it's pretty hard to scale up, especially if we're doing talking about enterprise use cases here.
We can talk forever, but yeah, I think as far as LangChain, like when I try to convince my leadership team to let me implement a Gen AI feature, usually I have to talk about how much time it's saving. And LangChain was a good example where we were actually spending a lot of time, back to what Margaret mentioned, kind of refactoring code. Every time a new version came up, things would change, things would break. So it wasn't really looking like we were saving much by then. But.
How did you end up managing the people side of the knowledge base? Right, as you know, once you set up this knowledge base of all these documents, and then it's going to live for a while, you're going to start to run into issues of, contradictory information, staleness. How do you deal with that governance problem?
So for us, actually we were mentioning, we start with a small knowledge base, and actually that knowledge base, for each content in that knowledge base, we have a content owner. So basically, like in the backend, we have a metadata recorded, like which day these pages are uploaded and who is the content owner of that pages. So whenever there's new information coming in for that specific pages, then the content owner take the responsibility to upload the new one and take off the older one, so that to try to avoid the knowledge contradiction issue.
I think I'm getting the signal now. We're going to wrap it up. Apparently, I can't trust the timer at all. Thank you very much from the audience and from our wonderful panel. It's a great conversation. Thanks all for joining in.